Thank you for joining us. I'm Harry Burkett with the Ocean Pines branch of the Worcester County Library, and I'm here with author Mark Millikin. He has written this book, The Joy and Heartache of Our 1960s Music. And you may recognize him from a talk we had earlier this summer. He's written a couple of other books that you can find in our Maryland room, The Glory of the 1966 Orioles and Baltimore, and also Jimmy Fox, The Pride of Sudlersville. And just to tell you a little bit about Mark, if you weren't with us last time, he was born in Baltimore, grew up as a teenager in Perry Hall. He received a Bachelor of Science degree in Conservation and Resource Development at the University of Maryland, College Park, and a Master of Science degree in Marine Biology at the College of Charleston. He worked for NOAA's National Marine Fisheries Service as a fishery biologist and fishery manager for 39 years. And in his second career, he's become quite an author. And we do put on a number of music programs at the library, so this was of great interest to us. So I should ask you, Mark, what compelled you to write your book about music of the 1960s?
Well, we hear it all the time that music is a universal language, and I think it's true. I think for the most part, from most people I know, music brings a lot of enjoyment into their life. And I know on a given day, when I'm a little bit down or in a slumber a little bit as far as the mood goes, it seems like music continues to amaze me or surprise me, and it shouldn't by now. But when I start playing some music, almost all the time, it lifts my mood. And I thought writing a book of this sort would also do that. It would provide light reading and evoke plenty of memories, mostly good ones. And one of my purposes, Harry, in writing the book was to jar a lot of memories for a lot of the baby boomers as far as songs they've forgotten about. And that has happened with quite a few people I've talked with who have read the book. So I think I met that goal.
When you were growing up as a teenager, did you ever imagine that this kind of music would last so long, rock and roll music, that you would hear it while you're pumping gas at the Wawa, or it's just everywhere and it hasn't gone away, and obviously had a lot more staying power than, say, big band music? Does that surprise you a bit?
Well, the more I think about it, it probably shouldn't surprise me, because when we were growing up in the 60s, we were hearing our parents' music. But now, like you say, there's more avenues or ways to hear it. And we certainly are hearing it a lot. Not having thought about it too deeply in the beginning, just a few years ago, as far as my parents and listening to their music here and there a little bit, I thought, wow, we're hearing it, like you said, in the Wawa. We're hearing it in the elevator. We're hearing it in the stores. The one part about it that does surprise me, I'm contradicting myself a little bit on this one here, but the thing is, Harry, back in the 60s, our music was thought to be a little bit, out there. Let's say psychedelic music, or some of the other more radical music. Now that I would have thought, we'll never hear that years from now. My goodness, James Brown, I'm Black and I'm Proud, or some of his music that I really liked. Some of that music, I cannot imagine hearing it now the way we do. It's really been a neat revelation to me. But I think, Harry, it's just appealing to us as baby boomers wherever we go. And then to say one more thing, I think a lot of the younger people are enjoying some of this music. Some of them like the Beatles, some of them like to learn how to play Led Zeppelin. That has surprised me.
Well, it surprised me the other evening. I heard Led Zeppelin at the Walmart. I said,
right,
we've turned some sort of corner here.
Right, that's what I was trying to get at, is some of that music that at the time when I was 18 or 20 and I was hearing it, I thought my parents would never listen to this music. No way. They would listen to Tom Jones or even maybe the Beatles or the Beach Boys, but I don't think they would enjoy Led Zeppelin. But now we're hearing it in places like that. That's what I was trying to drive at a few moments ago. That's a surprise.
So how did you spend time as teenagers then versus now, and how did that affect your listening experience? I'm wondering if it was more of a communal experience back then because everyone was listening to the same music. It's probably a lot more diversified now.
Well, you know, back then we didn't have, of course, our computers, and we weren't surfing the internet, and we weren't looking up things on Google and texting each other. We didn't have all those luxuries, and I do a lot of that now as an adult, and certainly teenagers do it a lot. In the 60s, we had no personal phones. We had one phone in most houses. Sometimes we had a party line, and we had one TV in most houses. So where I'm going with that is we entertained ourselves, I think, a bit more back then as preteens and teens with our music than we do now. And we did a lot of that by listening to AM radio in our rooms a lot of times, or in the car riding up and down the road, or in the kitchen. My mother would have the AM radio playing. Some of the hit songs I was listening to, she was listening to. And then, of course, the other thing was, Harry, we played our limited number of records that any of us owned. But the communal thing that I loved about the 60s and early 70s was that I would listen to friends' music down the street. When they bought a new album, they'd say, you got to come down and listen to this album, you know. And you had to go down physically and listen to it. You didn't listen to it with them over the phone or something or that kind of thing. But that was a neat thing. You were physically there with them, seeing their excitement, listening to what they were saying about the songs compared to what you were saying. And the same thing, Harry, then happened in the dorm at University of Maryland. People up and down the hall would be playing a new album they liked, and or saying, you got to come in and hear this one. You know, have you heard it yet? It's really good by Grand Funk or whatever other group. So I really like that part of our life back then. I don't know how much they're sharing music with each other that way now, but my sense is probably not as much.
Wow. And that's an enjoyable chapter of your book where you talk about going to University of Maryland and what it was like with your fellow students. And a lot of people consider the college years almost like an awakening. Were you exposed to other kinds of music there? Or I guess maybe it was just becoming a little more radical as you were there as far as music tastes.
Right. I happened to go to University of Maryland from 1969 to 1973. That was all in the thick of it as far as the Vietnam War. And I was not paying attention before I went to Maryland very much, paying attention to the songs with a message. But man, they were really peaking during that 4 or 5 year period at Maryland. And we'd have Jane Fonda come on campus, or we'd have Rennie Davis or these other, you know, activists for social causes, whether it was civil rights or whether it was the Vietnam War. And so the songs with a message by Marvin Gaye or any number, well, Merle Haggard had the opposite view of Vietnam from some of the other songs like Ohio. How about Ohio in May of 1970 when we had the Kent State happening, you know, 4 students being shot and killed on campus at a protest. A month or 2 later, Neil Young comes out with his song Ohio, and Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young recorded. That's always been a big song to reflect a lot of the feelings and of that era. So that's when songs with a social message really came front and center for me. And I certainly liked the other music still that was coming out of the Beach Boys or the Beatles that didn't have anything to do with that. But the songs with a message were really becoming more important.
Well, you cover in your book that you had much more of a variety of music in the 1960s than your older brothers and sisters had, say, in the 50s. Would you like to explain that?
Yeah, I wrote in there something to the effect, I'll even read it right here, basically from rhythm and blues, rock and roll, gospel, country, western, doo-wop, and folk music came soul, psychedelic rock, garage rock, bubblegum, folk rock, psychedelic soul, and hard rock. And these were kind of a branching out in many cases, but the psychedelic soul, let's just pick that one. That was kind of a fun one that would combine some of the aspects of psychedelic music with that revved up guitar and organ, with the aspects of the soul music that still made it appealing sometimes for dancing, or still had some of the other characteristics of soul. I never thought I would like another version of You Keep Me Hanging On better than the Supremes, but Vanilla Fudge's psychedelic soul version was something that really grabbed me. Or one more example was the Temptations had I Know I'm Losing You and Get Ready, and I didn't think you could improve on them. And maybe Rare Earth didn't improve on them, but they put a new twist to it as far as the sound. And I liked those versions enough to go see Rare Earth live at the Ritchie Coliseum at University of Maryland. But I've always loved the Temptations versions as well. So it was neat to have this variety going on where we'd get another cover that had a different sound to the same song.
Wow. Yeah, sometimes I'm amazed how somebody can take an old country song and make it an upbeat rock song, but it all translates.
Right.
Now, were there any specific songs that you can remember, whether they had a message or whether they struck a special chord with you that you remember the most?
Well, when I was really young, 13 or 14, that song by Bobby Vinton came out, Mr. Lonely, and it sure depicted that loneliness that a lot of servicemen and service women were feeling back then when they were away from home and not getting a call or not receiving a letter, wishing they were receiving a letter, wishing they were back with their family. And that made me think at an early age, gee, what it's like to be in the service and be away from home. And then the Who's song, My Generation, is one that even today to listen to it, it really depicts what a lot of the young folks that were teenagers and even in their early 20s were feeling if their parents were really opposed to their longer hair or the music they were listening to or that kind of a thing. You can go with Eve of Destruction by Barry McGuire. That was quite a groundbreaker in terms of being out in the open about the fears we had about nuclear war. And our fears about Russia and maybe the fears they had that we didn't know about too. We got to get out of this place by the Animals. Okie from Muskogee by Merle Haggard. One really good song to wrap that up as far as my mention is Ball of Confusion by the Temptations. If you listen to the lyrics to Ball of Confusion, it's all the same issues still here with us, although we've made a lot of strides on a lot of those issues. I think some very good, very significant strides, but all those issues, that they mention about disparity in income or racism or anything, they're still with it. And war, they mention war, I believe, too. So those are some examples.
It occurred to me the other day, one of those moments when you're driving home, that December 8th will be the 40th anniversary of the death of John Lennon at age 40.
Wow.
And the Beatles are a big part of your book. Why were they so popular and why are they still so important?
Yeah, that's a really important thing to a lot of us baby boomers for sure. I think what they did in 64 for us and what they did in 1963 for Britain was they had more of a liveliness to their early love songs. That She Loves You or I Want to Hold Your Hand were not slow songs. They were rollicking. They were raucous, and they really excited us to hear them. But then what happened was they didn't hang on to that same method of making music too long. They didn't get stale, Harry. That was what really made them so important or productive. They went right on to serious topics from that, like In My Life, When I'm 64, Eleanor Rigby. And they still also maintain many happy, peppy songs in their repertoire. They had Yellow Submarine, All You Need Is Love, Birthday, Back in the USSR, Here Comes the Sun. Most of these songs were songs we could easily sing to or sing along with other friends riding down the road in the car, which we did. So Lennon and McCartney and George Harrison were great songwriters, and that made their production continuous throughout the 60s too. They kept providing more and more hit records. They had so many hit records on their albums that they couldn't even put in 45s because they just couldn't keep up with it. It's kind of ironic now to look back and see how many of their better songs were never on a 45 record.
Wow, that's interesting. It sounds like they had a wide variety of songs and always something to match your mood at the time.
Right, right. Exactly. You could pick and choose. You know, you could, another thing about the Beatles, Harry, that really sticks out in my mind, and a couple of other groups were able to come close to matching it, but it wasn't easy, was a lot of their record albums you literally played from front to back or from the first song to the last song, and you didn't lift up that needle to move it to another favorite song. You just listened to the whole album. They were so good that you enjoyed the whole album.
And another major influence you mentioned are Motown songs, and I'm sure they really helped bridge a gap between black and white back then. They had a universal appeal, I guess.
They really did. The Motown started in 59. It started a little slow in the early 60s, but then around 63 or 1964, they had a period of about 5 years where they had somewhere along the lines of about 35 hit singles a year and many number one songs. And again, some songs that are a lot of fun to sing along to. But to me, the biggest thing about Motown, a lot of their music was really good for dancing. And so in our case in Perry Hall, I lived 10 minutes from Teen Center. We'd walk up there every Saturday night to go to a live band dance, and we'd hear a live band play music, and it might have been the Grassroots or it might have been Paul Revere and the Raiders they were playing, but by far what they played the most, Harry, in the 60s in Baltimore, in the Baltimore area, was soul music from Motown and Stax.
Oh, yeah. And you touched on the wide variety of like genres within rock and roll. And you have a chapter devoted to novelty and comedy songs, which is something that really doesn't exist today. What was the appeal of those back then? I guess comedy albums were big in particular anyway.
Yeah, I guess back then we even had some full-scale albums that were comedy, but the thing I remember about that era more were the singles. When I was like 9 or 10 years old in Randolph, Massachusetts, before we moved back to Maryland, this crazy song, does your chewing gum lose its flavor on the bedpost overnight? I was like, what in the world? I guess I laughed at that because my mother laughed at it when it would play on the radio. Then we had Alan Sherman with Hello Mudda, Hello Fada, Here I Am in Camp Granada, or something like that. And he had a couple other crazy songs along those lines too. We had that song by Napoleon somebody, I can't remember, They're Coming to Take Me Away, yes. Aha, you know. We had what I call the Halloween kind of song, the Monster Mash. We also had a song, Harry, that was fairly popular in the early 60s called Mother-in-Law by Ernie K. Doe, I think, D-O-E. Mother-in-law. That was very popular. And the Witch Doctor. We had the Witch Doctor and the Chipmunks Christmas, I think it was called, song. So
I had that album as a hand-me-down as a kid. And you may remember the album was actually red and you could see through it. And kids loved that. Right. Wow. Do you still have it? Somewhere in the attic, I think.
Somewhere in the attic. Well, dig that thing out, right? But yeah, I think that was just another aspect of life, of course, that we've always had and still have. And we love humor and we love having a little bit of fun or cutting up. And and that was a way to just have a couple of good laughs or sing along with that a little bit with somebody in the family or whatever, the novelty comedy songs.
Yeah, and you mentioned the one song, "Does Your Chewing Gum Lose Its Flavor?" Lonnie Donegan, he was one of those people, wasn't he hugely popular in the UK, but for some reason or another, he didn't translate here. I guess he never toured here, that sort of thing.
Right. Yeah, that you're exactly right. I've heard that he was very popular over there for a while. I don't know too much about any of his songs other than this one. Um, and I don't know a whole lot about why those earlier artists, Cliff Noble, maybe, I don't know. There were a few artists over there that were fairly popular there, but they couldn't break through here in the USA. But the Beatles had a lot going for them. They had their crazy personality. They didn't mind being teased by the press. They teased right back with the press. The Beatles had that new look, that mop head haircut that the girls loved. So many of the girls in Britain and the USA loved. But their music itself was just a cut above just about all the other music in the 60s, in the early 60s. And I think that really put them over the top too. I think it helped that they had four of them, Harry, and not just like an Elvis Presley. I think that's a lot of pressure on one vocalist sometimes. I think with the four of them, they kept focusing on different people, the cameraman and, the girls and the guys had all these different people to think about. And I think that was where a lot of groups started becoming more popular in the 60s instead of just the single vocalist.
Yeah, it gave a little variety, like if
Right.
George Harrison did the lead for a song, that was a little
Right,
bit,
right,
kept it
and the
fresh.
Beat exactly. Sorry to interrupt. And the Beatles even tried to have at least one song in most albums that Ringo was the singer. Right, right,
So there's a lot of tragedies associated with the 60s, especially uh, a vocalist during that era. And there's, several drug overdoses, other circumstances. Do you remember how those sudden deaths affected people at the time? How you felt about any of those events?
right, right. Um, well, I remember my mother listened to Sam Cooke a lot in Nat King Cole in the early 60s. And Sam Cooke died at age 33, I think, in 1964 of gunshot wounds. Um, And I remember her being quite taken aback, sad about that. And I was 13 then. Nat King Cole, I can't remember which year he died. He was a bit older, 45, but still somewhat young. And these two were two of the, by far, the most popular recording artists in the 50s and the 60s. And I still like listening to their music today. Now, I had been listening 2 or 3 years to Otis Redding when he died in December 1967. And I was very upset to hear about him dying, and I just couldn't hardly believe it. So about a week after Otis Redding passed away, I made a beeline up to Michael's radio, TV, and record shop up in the shopping center and bought this album. It's the same one I still have. It had almost all of his 10 best hits on it, in other words, but it did not have the number one hit that would come out the next month. He recorded Sitting on the Dock of the Bay about 3 or 4 days before he died. And that became his first number one hit. And it often made me wonder, Harry, and I think other people my age, what other hits were in the queue that probably would have come out if he hadn't died, because I think he was nearing a new plateau or a new level of hit making.
I guess in the case of Otis Redding, the other thing that made it especially tragic was it wasn't the result of a crazy lifestyle or
Right.
something reckless that he did. It was just a plane crash, a crazy incident.
Right. It wasn't the Jim Morrison, Janis Joplin kind of thing where we were sad to hear they passed away, but geez, how could they do that to themselves or whatever? But in the case of Otis Redding, or years before that, Patsy Cline or the Big Bopper and Richie Valens, some of these other people that just died in a plane crash, you're like, wow, You know, it just shows you how risky things can be in life. I did want to, if I've got another minute or two, I just
Hmm.
wanted to mention another album cover.
Oh,
Um,
yes.
this was, of course, Sergeant Pepper's. And when this came out in 1967, wow, we were looking at that cover trying to figure out who these people were. They might have had a key inside, like this version of the album cover has, that gives you the answers of who they are. There's a key inside this album cover. But I was also wondering, Harry, are they changing their name to Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band? I wasn't sure when this album came out if the Beatles were changing their name. Uh, but that's probably my favorite album cover of all time. And the music itself in that album was awakening too. There was a lot of psychedelic kind of music, and a lot of the lyrics and some of the songs were very strange. But then they'd turn around and they'd have a song like "With a Little Help from My Friends," which was more of a standard Beatles song. So they would do that a lot. They would mix the kinds of songs and lyrics that they had in different albums.
Wow. Well, I just wanted to mention your book again. Again, it's The Joy and Heartache of Our 1960s Music. And what I'm always impressed by, I've read it twice now, is
Wow.
the detail inside. There is no wasted words in here. It's like every sentence is a new fact, a new something. And while you mentioned growing up in Baltimore, and this would be especially appealing to someone who grew up in that area, it's really applicable to anybody who grew up anywhere listening to this music. And even someone like me growing up in the 70s and 80s, my life was hand-me-downs. Hand me down this, hand me down that, including the
Right.
music. It's such staying power. I listened to the same music. I got a lot out of this.
Wow. Wow. That's great. That's so nice to hear. It's so rewarding. And one store right near your library that carries the book is the Greyhound Indie Bookstore.
Oh, that's well, I was
Uh,
going to ask you the best way to purchase your book. That's one way. I suppose also on Amazon.
right. Yeah. And a third way is just to get it directly from me. So any of those ways would work. Um,
Okay. So you have a website people can go to directly?
no, I don't. So it's just millikenmark48 at gmail.com. But
Okay.
a lot of people buy it that way, just millikenmark48 at gmail.com. They just contact me and then we set it up. Um,
Okay.
thanks for asking.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Hopefully we'll have you back here live at the library. People can see you in person again.
That would be great. And then maybe we'll play a few music clips or whatever, like you said. In that scenario, maybe we're allowed to play some music. But thanks so much for having me again, Harry. It's always a pleasure to see and talk with you and talk about anything related to the music of that era or the Orioles or anything. So thank you very much.